culture is created moment by moment every single day by the way we think, act, and interact. And certainly the mindset of Jeans Friday or ping pong tables or whatever, getting together for drinks with your colleagues, like that may be an outcome of or an activity to help anchor the culture that you're going for.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the peopleHum interview series. I'm Aishwarya Jain from the peopleHum team. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM, that's specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and channel that receives more than 400,000 visitors a year, and we also publish several interviews with well-known names globally every month. And today we have with us Jason. Jason is a globally celebrated author, speaker, consultant, and creator of the Step Back from the Baggage Claim movement, featured in the New York Times, National Geographic Traveler, Kiplinger, Book TV, and many other spots worldwide. His most recent books, Remember and Thermostat Cultures, have been widely celebrated around the globe, and he's the host of the Thermostat podcast. He works with organizations that are passionate about culture change, leadership development, innovation, service, and bringing their mission to life every day. Jason, we're so honored and thrilled to have you. Welcome to the show.
Good to be with you. How are you?
I'm wonderful and even more delighted to have this conversation with you today. I know you've had like a really, I'd say different and very interesting past. And I'd really kind of love to know about, all the craziness that you've been through, and how is it that you finally came at, being somebody into consulting, doing leadership consulting, which has been running successfully for the past 13 years.
Yeah. I've been lucky to get to do it and great to connect with teams and organizations really all around the world. And I would say professionally, leadership, developing people and culture and clarity around mission, vision, and values has always been something that's been, important to me, something that I believe in, something that I have been lucky then to get to support teams, organizations all over the place with. But, it started, I think what you're referencing is the very beginning of this journey, at least for me 13 years ago or so, was the beginning of the book that I wrote, my first book, Step Back from the Baggage Claim, where I spent 7 days living in 7 different airports across the United States without leaving the airports the entire time. I was there literally sleeping on the floors and watching people 24 hours a day in all these different airports, watching the way that people move throughout the world, and then wrote the first book, Step Back from the Baggage Claim, Change the World, Start at the Airport, which really was about a metaphor for how we travel through life and how we move throughout the world. And, it's not about airports, but it is about that metaphor. And people began to connect with this idea for their own personal lives, but then certainly for their teams and organizations. What does it mean to kind of step back from the madness around a baggage claim and get more purposeful about the connections we make? What is it we're actually trying to accomplish, and how is it we want to travel along the way?
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful, Jason. And that makes all the more sense now more than ever, because, of everything that's going on around the world. There is chaos. People are kind of really depressed. It's not a nice situation to be in. And I think, I'd kind of love to know your views. Right now is a tough time for a lot of people, and they need support. They need motivation. And there are a lot of organizations that are struggling with employee engagement and productivity and efficiency. So how do you think leaders should address this?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been talking about with teams and organizations and doing a lot of virtual meetings and keynotes and that kind of stuff with a lot of companies ever since this began. But when you think about what's happened in the last 12 months, that people are dealing with a global pandemic. There have been certainly been economic uncertainties for many places that come with that. There's been political uncertainty. There's been certainly in our country, there's been social unrest and social justice and civil unrest kind of issues. There's been a lot that's swirling around people, and a lot of people then have been hurting because of it. And certainly we've been asking people to be isolated and quarantined, and more people are remotely working. And so it's become even more important. If you didn't believe that developing people and the culture and connections with people was important before this year, then I think that we've all been reminded of that. And so what I'm seeing and I'm supporting teams and organizations do in the midst of these times is the best leaders, teams, and organizations are proactively breathing life into their people. We need to breathe oxygen. And so that means with all the noise that's happening around us, all the negativity, all the blame, everything that's happening in the world, that the best teams and organizations and leaders are focusing on what is within our control and making sure that in many cases it's having to be done virtually, but how do we make connections with our team members and reach out to make sure that we're connecting emotionally with them and make sure that we say, all right, of all the things that are happening in the world that are out of our control, what is within our control and how are we committing to caring for each other, supporting each other, and then moving forward with the kind of excellence that not only we want for our own lives, but for our company and whatever it is, the service or the industry that you're in, that your clients have come to know and expect. And so we need to make sure that that's what gives our eyes and our focus and our attention. And the best leaders and teams and organizations are investing in that kind of connection with their people.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with you, Jason. I think, the part where there is so much ambiguity in the mix right now, I think leaders can really help provide that clarity. And you just said, right, kind of like have courage and really help make those connections, even though it might be virtual and it might be something that they're probably uncomfortable with. Right.
Yeah.
But I also kind of wanted to know from you, Jason, you've kind of observed humans at so many levels and for such a long time. Um, and you talk about, how language is so important in leadership. It's kind of,
Yep.
Driving your behavior. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So in my latest book, Thermostat Cultures, I talk about the proactive process that leaders and teams and organizations go through to shape the culture that they want. So every group of humans on the planet, every team, every family, every organization has a culture that is dynamic. That means it's changing moment by moment every single day. And so it's not a question of, is our culture going to change? It already is. But the best leaders, teams, and organizations, I talk about the reason why it's called thermostat cultures is because they get clear on what is the temperature that we're trying to set. And they have to proactively then set that temperature with their people and throughout their organization every single day by how they think, act, and interact. That's what begins to set that temperature and shape the culture that they want. And as you referenced, I talk a lot about language helps drive behavior. Because if we can't describe what is the culture that we're trying to create together, not just what we do as a business, but how we work together and how we create an environment, if we can't describe it to one another, then we can't be surprised when it doesn't exist. And so language becomes so important for us. And so the best, talk about this in thermostat cultures and the process of how we go through leading the kind of cultural change that we want. But language is such a key part of it because we need to be able to articulate what are the values that are at the center of everything we do. What are the values that are going to help lead us in the direction of that culture that we are proactively trying to create? And therefore, as leaders and everybody throughout our ecosystem, each of us have an opportunity then to set the temperature of those values every single day.
I love that, Jason. I love the analogy of the thermostat and how you correlate it with culture. And I also think sometimes culture is kind of overrated. And I feel like a lot of, especially startup cultures want to kind of make themselves look very cool by adding, bean bags, and then you have really nice coffee tables. But I think somewhere down the line, culture is kind of just mixed up with all of this. Do you think that culture really differs on the size of the organization?
Yeah. So thank you for bringing up that point too. Like I just wrote an article that about this idea that, somebody was asking me that they associated with their company that culture meant jeans Fridays, or it meant that they had ping pong tables, or that they had really cool seating or whatever. and that was what they referenced the culture to be. And saying that those things are not, that's not what it means to have a great culture. Those things might be strategies or techniques or things that you put into place to try to create an environment. But the culture is created moment by moment every single day by the way we think, act, and interact. And certainly the mindset of Jeans Friday or ping pong tables or whatever, getting together for drinks with your colleagues, like that may be an outcome of or an activity to help anchor the culture that you're going for. But the culture is truly created by the way we think, act, and interact. And so framing up the way that we show up of not just what we do, but how we're committed to doing the work, how we're committed to collaborating with our teammates, that thinking, acting, and interacting, that is the compelling elements of the culture. And so, yes, does it vary by big organizations and small organizations? But each of them, the way, no matter what size your organization is, the way that you create that compelling culture is intentionally, is by design, is by together being able to understand and have clarity around, well, what is that culture that we're going to create? And then making sure, I talk about in my book, and I talk about the process of culture shaping, that then we have to anchor it within our culture in everything we do, by the way we hire, by the way we onboard, by the way we do performance evaluations, emerging leaders, and yes, the way that we recognize people, appreciate, have fun together. All of those things are about anchoring the values and setting the temperature that we want.
Absolutely. I think anchoring is what makes culture really grow, makes an organization, nurture. It's like sowing seeds and finally, reaping what you're sowing. And that makes a lot of sense. Do you also think, if we talk about leadership development and innovation, sometimes there is toxicity in the culture, right? How can leaders deal with toxicity? And do you think there are certain symptoms or certain signs of toxicity?
Yeah, so I talk a lot about what we allow lingers. What we allow lingers, but what we teach triggers. And so in many cultures, there, unfortunately, the way things become toxic is when we allow certain behaviors, certain habits, we allow things to kind of linger, and that begins to filter throughout and linger throughout the culture because we're not willing to approach it or we're not willing to deal with it. The best leaders, as we start to identify or become aware that there might be a toxic behavior or toxic, habits that we're forming of the way we communicate with each other or things that are lingering in our culture, the best leaders are the ones that are willing to address it. And again, when we have clarity around what is the temperature we're trying to set and what those values are, it becomes even more clear when we're allowing things to linger that aren't in alignment with that temperature that we're trying to set. And so the best leaders are the ones that are able to acknowledge it and to call it out and to name it and just say, hey, this isn't the best of the temperature that we're trying to set. I think we're off base here. And let's make sure that we are then calibrating our thermostat and saying, okay, well, we can't let these habits or this toxicity to linger. We've got to figure out what is it that we need to proactively teach, that the things that we teach, that we say, no, this is the behaviors that we're going for. And these are the new habits and the new operations that we're going to begin to teach. Then it sets off this kind of positive and triggers this kind of positive chain reaction. But it means we have to be willing to name it when we see ourselves getting off track, or acknowledging when, hey, there are behaviors that are supporting and bringing about the very best of the culture we want.
Absolutely. I really, really kind of resonate with that. I think leaders, we really need to have these difficult conversations, and they need to have it quick in order to curb that toxicity. Otherwise, as you said, if you allow it, it is going to linger and it is going to be the rotten apple in the culture. And that's going to destroy everything that you've worked hard for. That makes absolute sense. Do you also think, when it comes to kind of generations working together in a workplace, so you've got the boomers, millennials, Gen Z, do you think there's a difference in the way leaders need to address culture to, all these generations?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I'll just acknowledge what you just referenced and what I shared is again, we have to be willing to call it out, and we have to be willing to have the conversation. I talk about that conversations are the currency for change. So if we want anything to change, we've got to be willing to address it. So as leaders, we need to be able to enter into those courageous conversations with each other and say, hey, I think we're capable of more. And what is that? And we have to be willing to be clear on then what are the actions and the behaviors and the things that aren't our best, and then be able to have the conversations about, okay, what's it going to look like to get ourselves back in alignment with those values. And in terms of generations, the same thing is true, is that we have to be willing to have conversations that are the currency for change. Younger generations right now, and especially they sometimes get a bad rap because people think different things, and their generalizations that people make about different generations. But what I will say about this is that right now we are living in, and especially younger generations are growing up in what I refer to as a participatory world. Everywhere we go, younger generations are growing up in times where they are a participant in in everything they do. That they walk into the coffee shop and it's not just what kind of cup of coffee do you want. They get to participate and pick out the exact kind of coffee they want. Craft beer, there isn't just one kind. They get to participate in all these different kinds of craft beers. On social media, they get to participate and tell us what they like or don't like, what you comment. So younger generations, the way that we operate in the world right now is very participatory. And so if the culture that we have inside our walls does not reflect that, then oftentimes that's going to be a disruptor for people that's the way they're used to working outside of their walls. So leaders from older generations are having to learn and create environments where they are bringing their people into participation around conversations about, well, what is the culture that we want together? And how do we all share in the creation of that culture? And how do I help every employee participate in the creation of that? That doesn't mean we do everything by vote. That doesn't mean that we have to have everybody's input before we make decisions. But it does mean as leaders, we need to be strategic about how do we bring people into participation, into creating the culture that we want together, and realizing that that's what people want. Increasingly more and more different generations, I think across generations, but certainly younger generations too, they want to be a part of a culture that's bigger than them, that they are participating in, and that they believe in the mission and the culture that they're a part of.
Absolutely. I think, millennials always kind of seek for purpose in what they're doing. And I think that's what, kind of resonated with me when you said that, they have to know what the mission is and they have to participate. There has to be inclusivity in the mix. And that brings about a beautiful, living, breathing ecosystem. So I love that. I love that insight. So I think I've had a lot of fun talking to you, Jason. I think the conversation has been so insightful. Lastly, I would like to ask you if there are any important sound bites that you'd like to leave our audience with.
Well, I love engaging with people. So anybody that wants to be in a relationship with me, I hope you'll track it down at jasonvbarger.com. Come visit me, jasonvbarger.com, or track me down on social media at jasonvbarger. You referenced the podcast earlier. If you like this kind of thinking, which my mission is to share this kind of thinking about how do we positively impact the world in the way that we develop leaders, the way we develop the thinking about how we serve and care for people. How do we create proactively the culture that we want and have clarity around mission, vision, and values? And so if you like this kind of thinking, the podcast, the thermostat with Jason Barger, I'm always giving these nuggets each week of ideas that will hopefully engage our minds and hearts and add value to you, to your journey, and to the culture of your team and organization.
Thank you so much, Jason. I loved talking to you. Definitely going to check out jasonvbarger.com. And I think I will love to kind of continue this conversation, again, if possible. And I think our audience is going to benefit a lot from this. So thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Glad you're well.
Thank you.